In this video, we're going to explore about 20 ghost towns and abandoned places in northern and eastern Saskatchewan. If you like abandoned churches, you're really going to like this episode. We're also going to see a bunch of grain elevators, gas stations, and a whole bunch more. This video was shot in July of 2024. So let's begin. Our first stop is Bresaylor, Saskatchewan. This is along Highway 16, northwest of North Battleford. This church was hit by a tornado in 1989 and moved off its foundation, but it still stands. The town is mostly a museum now, and it's open in summer by appointment only. It's one of my favorite churches in the entire province. The grain elevator was moved across the highway onto a private farm. And the rest of the town is just one road with a couple of residences. Our next stop is the ghost town of Robinhood, Saskatchewan. This town is located about 45 minutes north of North Battleford. And I'll put a list of all these towns in the description below, including GPS locations when needed. The town has about 5 residents left, not very many buildings. That may or may not have been the fire station. The post office closed in 1971 and the rail line was abandoned. After which, most of the residents left. But this town has one gem, and it's the old church in the forest. In my first visit in 2005, there wasn't nearly as many trees. In summertime, it's kind of hard to see the church from the road. It is now labeled no trespassing, and there's a sign on there that says it's dangerous. Our next stop is Whitkow, Saskatchewan. This is about a 30-minute drive northeast of North Battleford. It used to be one of the best ghost towns in all of Saskatchewan. It still has one of the old Ukrainian churches here. When I first visited here in 2005, the hotel and restaurant were still open. Now there's no businesses left. In fact, most of the town is now a farming operation. And the grain elevator is one of the more popular spots to shoot in all of Saskatchewan. Behind those trees, there is a former store. You just can't see it in summer. Our next stop is Krydor, Saskatchewan. It's between Hafford and Blaine Lake. The railroad left about 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the population dwindled pretty quickly. Main Street has a whole bunch of abandoned buildings, including the old cafe and hotel. There's still 14 residents who call this place home. I remember when this store was still open, about 15 years ago. It used to be a hardware store. Unfortunately, they've had to put up security cameras everywhere, probably because people were breaking into these old buildings. Someone still owns them, so please treat them with respect. The entire time I was here, I did not see a single person drive down Main Street. I'm not sure what this building used to be, but I suspect it was the grocery store. Maybe someone in the comment section can let me know. And like most of these Ukrainian towns, there's a church on the edge of town. This one was built in 1934. And I don't think it's in use anymore, but someone still cares for it. Next up is Smuts, Saskatchewan. This town is located about a half an hour northeast of Saskatoon. It was not a very big town, and there's still a few buildings left. I don't think anybody lives in the town anymore. At one point there was still a few residences. And it looks like this building's taken over by the trees. But here's the old Smuts Hotel. About 15 years ago, someone stole a truck and crashed into the front of the building. It's very dangerous. I wouldn't go inside. Yeah, it seems to have been renovated pretty good over the years. Most of the buildings along Main Street are long gone, but behind those trees you may see some collapsed buildings. And there's the old sidewalk. On the outskirts of town is another church. And if you drive about 2 kilometers west of town, there's yet another church, and it too is still cared for. Just up the highway from Smuts is Alvena, Saskatchewan, and that's going to be our next stop. There's still a lot of people who live here, but not nearly as many who lived here at its peak. And like most of these small towns, it has a church. This looks like it used to be the baseball diamond. Almost every business on Main Street has now been closed, but there are still some that are open. If you enjoy these videos, please consider donating $10 to your favorite animal shelter. It'll make me very happy. Because of how close it is to Saskatoon, a lot of more people seem to be moving here, and they've done a lot of things to improve the town. It's actually really pretty now. And this barber and billiard shop is one of my favorite abandoned businesses in all of Saskatchewan. This church is now private property. And there's another really good abandoned church right in the center of town. It seems to be in pretty bad shape. On the highway between Whitkow and Melfort is this old railroad trestle bridge. You can't really do anything here because it is no trespassing, and you can't access the top. You can only view it from the side of the highway. But I did bring my drone to get a closer look. I think this railroad has been abandoned since the 70s. Maryville, Saskatchewan is located about 25 minutes northeast of Melfort, Saskatchewan. It's famous for the 3 churches all at one intersection. Nobody lives here anymore. This is the most famous of the 3 churches. It's been abandoned for decades and it's in pretty bad shape. By the way, have you visited any of these ghost towns I'm featuring in this video? If so, let me know in the comment section below. And here's another one of the churches. It's recently been boarded up, probably because of vandals. I think until recently, they did hold some events here, but it doesn't look like they'll be doing so anymore. And a little further down the road is yet another church. This one is a Catholic church. I don't think there really was much of a town here, and the train never came. There was at one point a school in this town, but not anymore. Our next stop is Fosston, Saskatchewan. It's located about 20 minutes north of Wadena, Saskatchewan. The train still services this town, but it doesn't come very often. There isn't any more grain elevators, but there are a couple churches. One of them is still in use, the other one's been abandoned for a long time. And next door to the abandoned church is an abandoned community hall. I'd also be very interested to know where you are watching this video from. I live in Saskatchewan. Where do you live? Please leave it in the comment section below. And right in town they also have the old gas station and the old hotel, neither of which are still in use. "20 kilometers southwest of Fosston is one of the most amazing abandoned churches in Saskatchewan. This is the location, Township Road 370 at Range Road 2151. I've been told this church has never been in use. It was built, but no services were held here. There is a graveyard behind it, so I don't know if that's actually very true. But it is glorious. I wouldn't try to go inside, it doesn't look very safe. I've been shooting this place for 15 years and nothing much has changed. The next town we're going to visit is Wishart, Saskatchewan. There's still quite a number of people who live here, but Main Street is pretty much abandoned. And a lot of the buildings that were here 10 years ago are now gone. There used to be a lot more people who lived here. But like with a lot of small towns, once the rail line is abandoned, the grain elevators are gone, the population dwindles pretty quickly. I really like the sign for this meat store. They have a cute drawing of a cow and a pig. And here's the old grocery store. The roof is now caved in. I don't think this building is going to last much longer. Most of the rail lines in Saskatchewan over the past 40 years have been abandoned, so ghost towns like this are quite common now. And this used to be the movie theater. Now it's the post office. What a grand building that was. I don't think the curling rink is still in use. And over on the edge of town is the old school. It doesn't look like it's been abandoned that long, maybe 10, 20 years. Unfortunately, there was so much growth from the trees you can barely see it from the road. Just down the road from Wishart is Bankend, Saskatchewan. There's only 15 people who live here. The population of this town has collapsed quite a bit in the last couple decades. Right along the highway is the old hotel. And this was probably a cafe, gas station, and convenience store. I'm not sure what this building is. Maybe it used to be a house or the fire hall, but it is for sale. And once you go behind a hotel, there are a couple houses that have been abandoned for quite a long time. And this one has a window that goes right to the attic, and it's open. Our next stop is West Bend, Saskatchewan. It's just down the road from Bankend, Saskatchewan. It was a really small hamlet, and the rail line has been gone here for decades. Only a handful of buildings are left, and a few of them have been removed in the past few years. But one of my favorite buildings in all of Saskatchewan is the old school. It's very dangerous now, so you can't go in. The school had been in use until 1967. There's also an old gas station back here, but you can't see it because of all the trees. If you came in here in winter or late fall, you could probably see it. And here's the sidewalk. There's one really cool abandoned church that you gotta see. It's just about 2.5 kilometers northeast of Parkerville, Saskatchewan. You're gonna see a cemetery on the side of the road, and if you drive too fast, you're gonna miss seeing this church in the trees. I can't find any information about it, but it's pretty clear it's been abandoned for decades. A lot of trees have grown up beside it, so it's hard to get into. And it's probably easier to visit this place in late fall or winter. One time I came here and there was a whole bunch of frogs. I'm going to try to get a peep inside. Yeah, it looks like it's been vandalized. Our next stop is Insinger, Saskatchewan. It's a ghost town right along the Yellowhead Highway. Once they tore down the grain elevators, that's probably when the population of this town began to decline, because the train service still comes through town. Main Street still has a couple more buildings left in it, and there's still a few residents. But if you're like me and you just like exploring ghost towns for the fun of it and the history, you're really going to like this town. This was the road right to the residential part of town, and nobody lives here anymore. You'll see a couple houses and garage, and at the end there's a community center. But I really try to imagine what life was like here in like 1955. It probably was still a very busy place. A lot of people miss the old school on the edge of town. It's been closed for a long time. And it looks like the roof is starting to collapse, so it probably won't last much longer. And there's the iconic church right along the highway. A lot of people have probably seen this before. Over the past few years, the condition has deteriorated quite rapidly. It looks like a lot of the windows have been smashed open too. Our next town is Donwell, Saskatchewan. If you've ever seen my book, Forgotten Saskatchewan, there's a lot of buildings you probably recognize in this video that are in my book, including one from this town. I'll put a link to my book, Forgotten Saskatchewan, in the description below. The rail line and the grain elevators left this town decades ago. But it was never really that big of a town anyway. And this is the building and gas pumps that are in my book. 15 years ago, I do believe that store was still open, but now it's just used as a post office. And here's a house in the woods. Our next stop is the abandoned church about 1.5 kilometers east of Danbury, Saskatchewan. It's kind of difficult to see it in the summer. And it's not easy to see off the grid road. I can't imagine this church has been used in decades, and it's not very safe. When I shot this church for my book, it was in late spring, so the leaves hadn't grown yet. If anyone knows the history of this church, please leave it in the comment section below. Our next stop is Goodeve, Saskatchewan. There's still a lot of people who live here, but Main Street is littered with a bunch of abandoned businesses. When I first visited here in 2006, they still had a Pioneer grain elevator. All the grain elevators have now been torn down, but this town is along the CN main line, so it does get a lot of trains going through. And here's my favorite building, the old cafe. I'm not sure if the old bank is still in use. There's still a flag on it, but it doesn't look like they still use it. And this is the old community hall. And if you go down one of the residential streets, most of the houses have been abandoned. Somebody probably still owns them, so I'm not going to trespass. Goodeve is one of those towns that I like walking through, trying to imagine what life was like back in its heyday. And here's the beautiful church. Somebody still cares for it, and it's magnificent. They've done a great job with this. Now let's visit the town of Wroxton. Again, one of those ghost towns that still have a lot of residents, but a lot less than what used to live here. The rail line has been abandoned in recent years, but the grain elevator still stands. This looks like it used to be the old cafe right along Main Street. Here's a faded Pepsi sign. But the most famous building in this town is the old church. It looks pretty weathered, but someone still mows the grass. This thing is a beauty. I'm not sure if the grain elevator is still in service, though. But the train definitely does not come here anymore. And one of my favorite abandoned churches in all of Saskatchewan. It's on a grid road about 8 kilometers south and east of Southey, Saskatchewan. It's a stone church that's been abandoned for decades. And it is now labeled as no trespassing. But you can still get kind of close to it. This church has a really interesting history. I'll put a link to a great article on this church in the description below so you can learn more. Our next stop is Magyar, Saskatchewan. This place is in the middle of nowhere, approximately 30 kilometers north of Cupar, Saskatchewan. And it looks like it was just a one intersection town. There's an old service station and a collapsed building in the woods. There used to be another building, but it's gone. But about 2 kilometers north of the town site, you'll see a cemetery. And hidden in the road is one of the most amazing abandoned churches in all of Saskatchewan. It's not an all-season place to visit. I haven't been able to find anything about the history of this church, but if I do, I'll put a link to the article in the description below. It's not very safe to go inside, so I didn't. And for these old abandoned churches in the middle of nowhere, I'll put the GPS locations in the description below. Next, we're going to visit the town of Sintaluta, Saskatchewan. It's right along the Trans-Canada Highway, and it's definitely not a ghost town, but it has a lot of really neat abandoned buildings, plus it's just a charming little town to visit anyway. This is the museum, but I'm not sure it's open anymore. And this is the old hotel and restaurant. I'm not sure when it closed down, but it looks like it's been a long time. Probably lots of good memories in this place. But this one's my favorite. They got a really nice mural on the wall of this old building. And the grain elevator on the left, the smaller one, is now the oldest grain elevator in Saskatchewan. I believe it was built in 1897. And our next town is Candiac, Saskatchewan. I've been visiting this place many times over the past 2 decades. A couple buildings are now gone, but this place hasn't changed since the first time I was here in 2005. I do believe it was either a hardware store or some kind of general department store. And here's the old hockey rink. It now looks like it's been taken over by horses. And they do still have a beautifully cared for church in town. But my favorite thing are all these old combines or threshing machines they have right along Main Street. It's like a whole bunch of metal dinosaurs. You've got to come check this thing out. And this building won't last long, so you might as well go see it while you can. It seems to have collapsed in the last 2 years. I'm not sure what this building used to be. Maybe someone can tell me in the comment section below. But it does look like it may have been a restaurant or a cafe at one point, and maybe even like a hotel. Very beautiful building. At the old baseball diamond, you can see this old relic from 1985. Now just north of town, right along the highway, they have this exhibit. It's really beautiful and well cared for. Definitely not abandoned. And our next town is Neelby, Saskatchewan. It really only has these 2 grain elevators, one of which has partially collapsed. The rail line through here was abandoned in the 60s. Somehow these 2 grain elevators have survived all this time, but they won't last much longer. They're in very bad shape. And finally, there's Bering, Saskatchewan. Nobody lives here anymore, but there is 1 grain elevator in a farmer's field. I'm not sure when this rail line was abandoned, but it's been decades. But just on the other side of the road is an old community hall. This looks like it may have been some kind of concession stand. And the old community hall is back here behind the trees. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I can't tell you how much I enjoy making them. I've been cruising around Saskatchewan for 20 years now, and it never gets old. And it brings me great pleasure bringing you along with me. If you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the comment section below. And thank you so much for watching.